All right then, this is the final session of today, wrapping up this afternoon's sessions. I'm very pleased seeing the large number of attendants. It's very wise of you that you came. Those who are not with us do not know that they are not going to be served a main course tonight. That will be a surprise for them, as it is a reward to you that you will. Because I tend to forget to make practical announcements, I start making them. Tonight we have a gala dinner in the Collegio Fonseca, which is at walking distance, about 13 minutes from here. 9 o'clock it starts, and you're welcome to arrive a couple of minutes before. Gala doesn't mean that you need academic attire. I mean, this would be good, or the equivalent of it. Tomorrow, as you certainly have read in your papers, we have additional security check because of the presence of the Spanish king at the ceremony. And these security checks will be done starting 7:45, ending strictly at 8:30. So please make sure that you are on time. Either go directly here after the gala dinner, or set your alarm at the right moment. You need to bring your passport or ID card so you can identify yourself. The representatives of universities that are signing the Magna Charta Universitatum for the first time tomorrow are kindly asked to go to the first floor, to one of the rooms there, where they will assemble and wait for the procession to take place. And those who are not part of the procession, they are, after being accepted to the cloisters, invited to go and sit in this very room on the seats that are reserved for them. Those were the two practical announcements. Sleep outside until the security starts, and don't be late for the gala dinner. Well, as I said, we are now about to embark upon the final plenary session of today. And for that purpose, we have a real superb panel and the most expert that we have in our group. I'm referring to John Davis, who will offer some reflections on the discussions we had today and looking ahead towards possible next steps. And after that, we have additional reflections from Mona Bunware, who is the representative of the University of Mauritius, to your right, member of council there, one of the pilot universities. Seated next to him is Marcelo Knobel, rector of the University of Campinas in Brazil, also one of the pilot universities. Then you see there Caroline Parker, and she is in a way the fairy queen of this whole project. She led the Living Values Project before it was called the Living Values Project at Glasgow Caledonian University. And last year in January we had our first workshop in a series of workshops at that university, and Caroline there presented their experience that under her leadership for a couple of years had been taking place in Glasgow and had been really re-energizing the university. And that was not just her testimony, it was the testimony of many members of that university that we talked to during that workshop. So she was one of those, that's why I called her the Fairy Queen, one of those that was really right from the start making us optimistic about not just the use of this kind of a project, but also about the reassurance that it can be done if you have the kind of leadership that she represents, of course. And then last but not least, Eva Egron-Polak, who is a member of Council of Magna Charta Observatory and who has been also one of the ambassadors, the liaisons between the project and pilot universities, in her case, both with the Campinas University in Brazil and with the University of Mauritius. So she is a close friend of those two institutions by now, and vice versa. So this is the panel we have, and I would now like to invite John to give us his reflections on state of play.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. President, colleagues, it's a great pleasure to attempt to offer some reflections on what's been a very complex set of discussions, but greatly enriched by the various contributions which we've had from both the floor and from the case institute, the pilot institutions. The first thing I think which I'd like to emphasize is that unlike a number of other things like quality assurance or accreditation, of course, signing up for this is very much a voluntary decision. You're not obliged to do it, you're not mandated to do it, and we hope very much that you will. And if you do, I think it's very much up to you then to determine how you would like to proceed with this. And as you'll observe, of course, from the cases we've seen, different of our pilot institutions have adopted quite different approaches within the broad framework. And this is very much, I think, what we intended. So our task, I think, has been very much to try to empower institutions who want to embark on this process rather than compel in any shape or form. And consequently, of course, the guidelines are by no means prescriptive. They are intended to simply offer assistance and options and so forth. And what we do recognize, of course, is that there are a whole series of different situation variables because we've got different sorts of institutions. And I think this event differs from 1990 or whenever it was, because there was almost a standardized definition of what a European university was. Now we clearly got a whole spectrum of different types of universities, and therefore it's logical that you should approach this exercise in different ways. The second point I think I'd like to mention is that values, of course, is a sort of an elusive concept, both the concept itself and the individual values themselves. And I think the institutions are to be very much congratulated on bringing some definition, to what some vague esoteric word might be. They've brought it down to earth. And clearly, whereas the exercise is by no means finished, nonetheless, I think they've defined what they want to do in a way which I think is fairly clear and very, very encouraging. If we look, of course, at the whole project, it does include, of course, two main elements. One is the identification and the definition, and therefore, of course, the formulation and acceptance of whatever values you feel are important. And what is actually quite interesting is that we've got a lot more values in the guidelines which the institutions identified than we ever had back in the olden times in the last century, if I can put it that way. And I think this is very, very helpful indeed, because it does reflect, the changing nature of the world which we live, which I'll talk about in a minute or so. But what I think has been really interesting about the discussions on the formulation of values is that various people have said this was really a very enjoyable exercise. The words joy permeated the atmosphere as they were saying it. I mean, joy was in the air, if I can put it that way. And that's really very good. The interesting question, of course, after that is how do we embed values in the day-to-day work of the institution? How do we implement, in other words, which is a different thing altogether. And as far as that's concerned, I think what we've seen is two types of approach. One is what I might call a beacon approach, where the values once formulated have been put up there and people have responded to these in whichever way they've thought appropriate and designed whatever activities or behaviours they felt appropriate in that particular way. And that's absolutely fine. And I think if you've got a culture of an institution which can do that, that's great. On the other hand, of course, some institutions felt the need to create some sort of cascade, whereas where the values were taken and worked out in terms of what this meant for behaviours or actions to be undertaken by particular groups. What these values meant in terms, secondly, of particular domains like research or teaching or internationalisation or whatever it might happen to be. And what these values meant, of course, in terms of the way in which units in the institution ought to behave as well. And finally, of course, how the processes of the institution ought to reflect these. And this is something, I think, which is obviously can't be done in a very short period of time. This is an evolutionary process. And I guess the next stages of the development of the pilot institutions is going to be to figure out how this cascade will sort of come down. I would very much hope, that the beacon approach would work in most cases, but I strongly suspect there probably would need to be some sort of mechanism beyond that to move towards the implementation stage. In relation to that, though, I think it is important that where institutions have demonstrated they've got where they are by a series of organic processes, of thoughtful processes and so on, that when they go to the next stage, this does not become converted into a bureaucratic chore. And this came up, I think, in a number of different groups. And that's, I think, rather important. I mean, we all get totally fed up, with accreditation and quality reviews and, turgid strategic planning cycles and so forth. Can we retain the excitement of this in the next cycle of debate? And I think this is one of the sort of big challenges which comes out. And in this, I think, the role of the rector or the leader of the institution and the leadership of the institution broadly, implying distributed leadership, becomes really very important indeed. The style of the leader is important. We had some very interesting cases, Tasmania, for example, and Stockholm, where the leader, if you like, set up a process which virtually ran itself. And I think this is really quite inspirational. It's a means of permeation. It's a means of preventing the thing getting stale. But I think I would say, that there is a danger of staleness, as we progress, and I think we need to figure out how we're going to avoid that. But nonetheless, I think what we are seeing, I think, is a movement towards thinking about how we actually embed. And we had a discussion about the strategic plan and how that might figure there as well. But it also applies, of course, to all sorts of things like how you embed it in research strategy, how you embed it in internationalization, how you embed values in teaching and learning, and so forth. The next point, I think, is simply to say that we are, of course, all in different sort of settings. And whereas we may, have adopted something like trust as one of our fundamental internal objectives, and this is absolutely fine, we may be placed in an environment where trust is not high on the agenda of external agencies. And I suspect if you look at a lot of quality, accreditation, strategic planning systems throughout Europe and indeed other parts of the world, they're not based on trust. They're based on suspicion. They're based on compliance. They're based on control. And I think it seems to me you've got a little bit of a problem coming up if you adopt a whole lot of values which are terrific, very splendid values, unapproachable, unimpeachable values. But if your agencies outside do not subscribe to those values, then I think we've got a bit of a dislocation, which I think we probably need to, work with you in terms of figuring out how this can be resolved. And it may be, of course, there's a dialogue with external agencies which has got to take place. Maybe it's a question of negotiation over the style and processes of these interface functions between agencies and ourselves. As David and I found out when we were working in Kazakhstan a couple of years ago. It can be done. It can be done with goodwill on all sides. But I wouldn't minimize the difficulty. It's quite apparent, of course, that lastly, this particular project, of course, is not finished by any means. We use the phrase in the guidelines, this is not a destination to be sought after. This is a journey with no end. And consequently, I think the cycle of when we address the need to revise our values and therefore revise which follows up from them probably needs to be thought about in advance. I think that's certainly true. And it does occur to me in that sense, of course, that the situation which we've got in society these days, of course, is quite troubling. It's troubling, in terms of what's happening in society generally, fragmentation, this whole secular dogmatism which was described this morning. It's happening because some of the institutions which have been the custodians of stable values are now in disarray, like the church or like government or whatever it might happen to be, banks, of course, particularly. So we've got, if you like, something of a vacuum in terms of values in society. But it does strike me, of course, this is a wonderful opportunity for universities to collectively and singly have a major impact, on trying to rebuild societal values. We talked about values as being about internal behaviour. The next step, of course, is how we use those values to try and recreate, the societies in which we live, which is thoroughly compatible with what the original founders intended. But I think this is really quite a big sort of task for us, and I think we ought to think about how we do that. The final point, I think, I've got the sort of feeling, that we are on the start of something big in this project. I'm reminded of a lovely story. It was at the beginning of the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 48, and a general came into the tent of the King of Prussia and said, "Sire, the 30 Years' War has just started," which, if you don't know, you get the meaning of that, but reveals a great sort of foresight, as to what might happen in the future. I've got a distinct feeling, that our 30 Years' War is beginning to start as well. And it's been a real pleasure to collaborate with you in the way in which we intend to go. And hopefully we are on a long journey together, to which I look forward very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for this set of thoughtful reflections. Mono, if you were to think back to before you embarked upon this, before you decided to be one of the pilot institutions in Mauritius, and you compare what you then knew to what you know now, how would you describe the main difference?
All right. Okay. So what happened at our university when, you know, all the discussion, all the talk at the University of Mauritius, until this project came along, all the talk had always been centered on research, on the quality of research, on teaching, consultancy, and the sort of things that universities usually engage upon. But when we were invited to be one of the pilot sites for this Living Values project championed by the Magna Charta Observatory, we immediately jumped to the occasion because it provided us an external catalyst to start a discussion, to start a dialogue on values. And this has indeed started. The second thing is that all the time, previously, the things that we were dealing with, whether it be research or university strategy, was a top-down approach from management downwards. This was different. With Living Values, what we decided at the level of council, the management was all for it, to start from a bottom-up approach. So it was a group of volunteers drawn from academics, from students, from administrative staff, and the VC was not a part of it. No member of senior management was part of it. It was entirely driven by the community, the university community. Yes, there was a majority of academics in it, and the reason is we found that when we had got students, very often sometimes they didn't turn up to all the discussion groups because logistic reasons, they had lectures or they had some other social functions to go to and so on. But there was a core group of academics who were genuinely volunteers and interested in promoting this thing. The third thing is that we started off by trying to assess the status to which we were adhering to values. There were 4 values which the Magna Charta embodies, advocates: autonomy, academic freedom, integrity, equity. We had added 2 other values. And I must say, the whole process started only this year, at the beginning of February, with the arrival of Eva in Mauritius. So then we added 2 other values, which was responsibility and respect. Respect for other opinions. Respect and willingness to amend one's opinion upon listening from other experience. Responsibility, willingness to assume responsibility for one's actions and be accountable for it. So we added those 2. And then so we proceeded with doing an assessment of the status of all 6 values on campus. Again, everything was driven, designed, implemented by the academic staff, except when we needed some finance. Then we knocked at the door at the VC, and he was all for it. He helped us immediately, no question asked. The finance was there to help us with the advertising sort of thing that we were doing. And what has changed is that before there was never talk about values, but now students, staff in the meetings, students in the meetings with their lecturers, there are discussions, there is talk about values. That's one. Secondly, in committee meetings, when staff are sitting on committees and so on, some issue crops up and they often say, but is that in accordance with integrity? Are we being equitable? So these things crop up. So that is one big difference. And what we hope eventually to achieve is to generate to create a new generation of students which will go into society and be more responsible, be more respectful of other points of view, be more responsible, willing to assume responsibility. So we are looking at it from a point of view that it will also generate change, not only at the university level, but also in society at large.
Okay, thank you very much. Beautiful story. What I particularly liked about what you just reported is that you said one of the values that emerged is the value of respect for other opinions. I mean, I have heard some people sort of fear that at the end of a Living Values project, a university will be just a bunch of robots with similar opinions and values all around. And your report indicates that there's no fear for that to happen. But what might happen, and what one would like to see happen, is that we have found ways to deal with difference of opinion and even differences of values. Instead of burying them, instead of avoiding them, knowing how to live them in the community. Because, I mean, I used to say in the days I was president of the University of Amsterdam, at many meetings, we have one thing in common as faculty of this university, and that is we lack the talent for obedience. And the experience that I had is an experience of many colleagues. Universities are not populated by people who are like-minded. They have an impetus to be of a different opinion, and to yet make the university a community of dialogue, of tolerance and respect would be a great outcome. Marcello, one of the items, one of the aspects that was often brought to my attention is the aspect of time. And in two ways. Is there an estimate as to what such a living project engagement would cost in terms of time? And is there something to say about the time limit? When will it be finished?
Thanks for the question. In fact, I don't think it's there is a time and the timing as well. So in our university, we started the process of this project, the Living Values Project, and we started a group of people working, interdisciplinary group, working on these ideas, and we made a workshop that also Eva was there. And then we planned a survey to become a social experiment for all the university. We wanted the response not only from the community of the university, but also from external stakeholders. The problem that we faced is that the timing was not good enough, because we have also the strategic planning and the evaluation process, and even the administration said, well, we will do this now, and then next year we will start all the process of so maybe the timing was not the best, and we decided to postpone a little bit some of the ideas. And in my opinion, there is no time to do that. So it's a process of discussion and enhancing what the community thinks about the main ideas that we have about the values of the university. One important thing that I would like to point out is that many times we should discuss as much as possible the idea of what we mean by the values. Usually people from administration that is used to use the strategic planning, for them values is a different thing. We are talking about principles here. So we are talking about basic principles that should guide our university. And in order to really talk about the same thing, we should initially take some time to discuss what we mean by each single value that we are discussing. And this is really important. So I think it's a process, as you mentioned before, it's I believe that it would never end. I hope so, at least.
Okay. Caroline, the Glasgow Caledonian University embarked upon this before all of us, so you have some more time to look back. What I remember from our workshop in Glasgow is that Glasgow Caledonian advertises itself as the university of the common good. And I had a conversation with the Vice-Chancellor, and she said to me at the time, this motto, the University of the Public Good, had in a way become an empty shell. We still used it, but there was not real content to it. And I thought, gee, if that is something that you can repair, add to your trust, to your community that you want to serve, that's quite something. How did you do that? How did the values project of the university itself contribute to filling that motto with new content?
I think in some ways it was a fairly easy task in that who can argue with the University for the Common Good? If you think about values, they're things that you hold dear to yourself. And our staff survey, although when we did it in 2012, the staff were feeling it was an empty promise, personally, they very much believed in the University for the Common. They believed they were there for the common good. So what the Values Project did was to take that concept of the common good and to find out what it meant at the bottom level for staff and for students. And our values grew out of that staff feeling of what the University for the Common Good should look like on its best day. So it very much came out of that staff and student core experience and desire, because obviously we weren't living as the University for the Common Good at that point. But what our values give us the opportunity to do is to gradually move back towards really being the university that delivers. And one of the things that I have found so heartwarming is the enthusiasm with which both staff and students align to that and see immediately how they can tune what they're doing, whether it's a research project, whether it's bidding for work, whether it's students thinking about what they can do in the local community, both to our mission for the common good and to our values. We have an activity which we've run for the last 2 years, it's running again this year, called Points of Pride. And we very actively link our values to our common good mission, to things that we are proud of. So it's an exhibition which showcases all of those things that individual staff, whatever part of the university they're from, have done, whether it's changing a process to help the common good within the university, whether it's working with homeless people in Glasgow, whether it's helping on an eyesight repair project in South Africa. But everybody then sees what we're doing, and we get this sense of shared involvement and shared pride in that common good mission. So it's a building process by using the values to just keep iterating that. And we're not there yet. I'd hesitate to say we were close, but we know where we're going, and we've got the values to help us get there.
Eva, you are among all of us, no doubt, the most experienced person in the world of universities worldwide. Years of being Secretary General of the International Association of Universities have made you knowledgeable about the wide variety of university leadership, the wide variety of university models, the wide variety of university traditions and cultures, and you know better than any one of us how different we are. Given that kind of an experience, how do you see this project to be elastic enough to be of use and to be usable in all these different circumstances? Can it be done?
It's a terrible way to introduce someone to say what you said. Tall order. I like the notion of elasticity. Is the project elastic enough? I think it has to be if it's going to go forward. I think the differences between institutions aren't simply between geographic regions. We have such a diversity of higher education institutions and universities in every country today that the approach this project takes needs to be fairly adaptable. And I think it's one of the things that we struggled with as the project was being designed. On the one hand, I think the MCO wanted to be helpful, concretely helpful, to assist institutions to move from words and pious thoughts to real action. But we were very careful not to be prescriptive. And so it's a balancing act. What tools do you provide? I think I like what Marcello said about the notion of values and the notion of principles, because they're different to some extent. And I've been struggling with the fact that we put them all in the same basket. We talk about academic freedom and institutional autonomy in the same way as we talk about transparency or accountability, because we say these are all values. I think there is something that is quite fundamental in the principles that are those cornerstone principles of ways that institutions must operate from the values. And I think that one of the challenges of the project will be to recognize that even though we may say there's universality with regard to those principles, their implementation and their manifestation will be different. We have to accept that. On the other hand, we also, in the project, have to accept that there will be other values, and these will be values that are of importance to a certain institution according to its mission, according to its setting, in accordance to other institutions in the same environment. And not to lose sight of how important those values are, but not to impose that on anyone else or any other institution. And I think you categorized this morning values into three different ones, and I've been thinking about it because it's a way of structuring thinking about it. The enabling values that I would think are the principal cornerstone ones, some operational values, rules of conduct, behavior, and aspirations to where we want to go, and some social values which link us to society and which link us to the multiplicity of expectations from society. I think it was Pam who talked about, and the rector from Granada, that talked about the different expectations from institutions today. We need to be clear about who speaks for society and how we respond to societal needs, because they're also diverse. So I think, to answer shortly, absolutely, the project is elastic enough to be of use to institutions, if for no other reason, to stop and think and take stock of what motivates each institution, what makes us the university we are, or the higher education institutions that we are, what brings us together, what are those values. I think that is an effort that can be undertaken everywhere. I won't say should be undertaken because I don't want to be prescriptive, but can be undertaken and can have value everywhere.
I'd like to conclude this session by a round of questions and remarks from you, from colleagues in the audience. So let's take 4 or 5 of them. I have a microphone. Who would like to be the first to use that opportunity? Yes?
Thank you for all your descriptions. And I would like to go back to what Eva said at the end and what has been discussed around me during the day, and that is that to be keen on what we put into values, that we not say that everything is values and we mix it up. Because in my concern is that there are some core values that we really have to protect, and I think that there we can be together. But there are other values of importance and which could be very different from different regions, but also from different higher education institutions. So, what do you call it? Elastic enough? Yes.
Okay. Who else? Yes.
My question is has to do with that distinction between principles and values. So if we assume principles are those essentially fundamental things that the existing Magna Carta lays out, and values can be more locally defined, is it conceivable that institutions could find those principles coming into conflict with local values?
Okay. Who else? Everything clear? Well, let's start with these 2 points. Who would like to reflect on them? Yeah, no.
The second point, the point just raised, about principles and values. At the university, we have 2 fundamental principles, which are the ones which are in the original MCU. Autonomy, academic freedom, or intellectual freedom, because sometimes people get confused with academic freedom, so I prefer to use intellectual freedom. Right. So those things are already inbuilt into our statutes. So there is no way out of it. It is already inbuilt into our statutes. And we have to comply with the statutes, with the Act. But for the other things, the integrity, the equity, the respect, the responsibility, those are what I would properly call values. And what this project has afforded to us is to promote those values. The project, when we first received this invitation to be part of this Living Values Pioneer pilot testing site, was it was conceived as an assessment to what extent the signatory universities were adhering to those values. But it started off like that. Very quickly afterwards, it veered off into some other direction. It became a process for promoting values. And like Marcello said, there is no end to this. It's the start of a process, because you want to keep on promoting those values, which you feel are important for you. So maybe. Oh, sorry.
I think I also go to the second question. I don't think I can answer it categorically, but I would hope that the values that we identify as institutions are aligned with the principles. So there should be no conflict between the values. There may be instances where there's a dilemma, a moral dilemma between the fundamental principles and, let's say, academic freedom and the respect for other opinion. But I think the university also has an obligation to respect reasoned opinion, which is less likely to cause that moral dilemma than opinions. And I think I've been struggling with the answer that we received this morning from John Sexton to the simple question: are there instances where a university should not allow someone to speak on campus? And he didn't answer it to my satisfaction. But I've been thinking about it, and I think it goes to your question as well. And I think if we agree to the notion of reasoned opinion, which is what the scientific community is used to, then those conflicts would not arise. Where they arise is when the opinion is one that is an opinion, not a reasoned position. But I think your question is very difficult to answer. I would hope not. The answer would be, I would hope not.
I would say that can be a conflict. I would tell you by an example. And these conflicts can appear always when we discuss the basic principles. And usually what happens is when we talk about these principles like autonomy, like academic freedom, this kind of conflict can happen. Let's say there is one of the principles, or let's talk about the ideals of the university would be diversity and equity. And if there is a government that appears, I don't know, a dictatorship or a government that forbids any kind of social inclusion or affirmative action or whatever it happens, can happen in any country, in any university, and they forbid that practice for happening. So this is a clear conflict regarding an autonomy together with the basic principle of the university, that would be diversity or whatever the university itself decides. So this is something that the solution for this is, of course, struggling for the basic principles to keep happening, which is autonomy, which is the academic freedom and whatever. So the conflicts can happen, but the solution would be to really believe and struggle together, I would say, as a community for higher education institutions for these basic principles. And I think this is the important role of a Magna Charta, like the document that we are discussing here, that many universities are signing tomorrow, and that we are rediscussing in the next few years. The idea that there are basic principles that we all together, we should keep fighting for. And this, I hope at least, would solve all the conflicts. This is my personal opinion.
Okay. I'm standing here in front of the rector of Bologna University, and the University of Bologna was also one of the pilot universities. And I would like to take the opportunity to ask you what you think that the university has benefited from engaging in this project so far.
Okay, thank you. I think that the first benefit for us is that we had the chance to discuss about values. In all institutions like University of Bologna, and the people living at the university in our community somehow consider values as something that is granted. And so this was a good occasion for us to rethink about that. And we tried an approach that was like other pilot as a bottom-up approach. So we tried to engage professors, staff, and students. And what we experienced is that at the first moment we noticed some suspicious about this kind of initiative, but after this, the first moments, we got a lot of participation from all people that we engage. So we have fruitful discussion, and I think that this could be a very useful occasion for us to rethink about our values and to better inform our strategy. So we are discussing right now that we are going to review our strategic plan next year. And so I think that this kind of discussions that we had will somehow help us to review our strategy. So I think that this was a very good occasion for us, and my suggestion is trying to engage the community as much as possible.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to read to you a remarkable piece of text, if I can find it here in my papers. Yes. Freedom in research and teaching is the fundamental principle of university life. And government and universities must ensure respect for this fundamental requirement. Rejecting intolerance and always open to dialogue, a university is an ideal meeting ground for teachers capable of imparting their knowledge and well-equipped to develop it by research and innovation, and students entitled, able, and willing to enrich their minds with that knowledge. Beautiful sentences, isn't it? This is the Magna Charta Universitatum English translation, 1988. The original is Latin. I won't read that to you. If you want to, I have it, and it sounds beautiful. But this is the English translation. So it's freedom in research and teaching as the fundamental principle of university life. It deserves to be protected. And then it goes on to say, rejecting intolerance and always open to dialogue, a university is an ideal meeting ground. But then the interesting thing is that it adds not just a meeting ground for anyone, now, a meeting ground for teachers capable of imparting their knowledge and well-equipped to develop it by research, and students entitled, able, and willing to enrich their minds with that knowledge. So both the teachers and the students get qualified. They receive these qualifications. And in the Latin it said, the teachers should be peritus, they should be experts, they should be capable of imparting their knowledge and well equipped by doing research. And students, they are not just students interested in joining any party where there is cabal or drama or opposition. No, it's students entitled, able, and willing to enrich their minds with that knowledge. And in the recent months, I have interviewed some of the drafters of the original text of the Magna Charta, and I asked them, why did you write this up? And they said, we wanted to qualify the dialogue and the tolerance of a university and the character of the meeting ground. So a university is not just like a theater where you can have any kind of discussion. A university is a qualified theater. It's a meeting ground for capable teachers and willing students, willing to use arguments, stand for reason, use reason, and engage in that kind of a dialogue. And it's that kind of a qualification, I think, that we need in setting the borders between the freedom of expression kind of reasoning that we have in many constitutions worldwide and the specific freedoms that we talk about in university. That was my conclusive reading from the 30-year-old text, hopefully showing that it's still modern and it is still applicable to our situation. Thank you very much for joining us today. You have been a very stimulating audience, and I thank members of panel, and in them all speakers we had today. Some of them, John Sexton is already on the plane to New York to teach tomorrow morning in law school. He said, I can explain to my students that I miss one class this week, but not the second one. So on Tuesday morning, I have to teach class. And other speakers are still with us. I want to thank all of them very much for their contributions and you for being here. And let's have an enjoyable evening. Thank you very much.